You have been giving your love away for so long to people who needed you, who leaned on you, who sometimes took without even noticing they were taking, that somewhere along the way, you forgot to keep any of it for yourself. And now you are here, quietly, maybe in the dark, maybe in the car, maybe in the only 15 minutes of the day that belong to no one else. And something in you is asking a question you have never quite known how to ask out loud. What would it feel like to love myself first? In today's audiobook, we explore one of the most quietly radical acts a person can undertake, the long and tender process of learning to place yourself at the center of your own life. This is the heart of Love Yourself First, More Than Anyone Else, published by Unchained Heart. In these pages, we go beyond the surface of what self-love has come to mean in popular conversation, beyond the bubble baths and the affirmations written on bathroom mirrors, and into something far more honest, far more difficult, and far more transformative. We go into the places where self-love was never modeled for you, into the relationships where you learned, slowly and without realizing it, that your worth was measured by how much you could give, into the body that has been holding the weight of everyone else's needs, while your own went quietly unmet. This is not a book about becoming selfish. It is not a book about closing your heart or withdrawing your care from the people you love. It is a book about a specific kind of hunger that many women carry. A hunger that has no name because it has never been allowed to speak. The hunger to be seen, valued, and loved by the one person whose love you will live with every day of your life. Yourself. Throughout these chapters, we will sit with the origins of this, the early messages you absorbed about what it meant to be a good woman, a good daughter, a good partner, a good friend. We will trace how those messages shaped your sense of identity, who you became in relationships, and what you learned to silence in yourself in order to belong. We will sit with what your body has been carrying long after your mind made peace with things. And we will move, gently and without force, towards something that is not a destination, but a direction, toward a life in which you are no longer last on your own list. In Chapter 1, we return to the beginning, to the first places where you learned that loving yourself was something to be earned, not given. In Chapter 2, we explore how that early learning shaped the woman you became, her edges, her silences, her extraordinary capacity for care that so rarely turned inward. In Chapter 3, we look at the patterns this created in your relationships, the dynamic you kept finding yourself inside, even when you promised yourself things would be different this time. In Chapter 4, we come to the body, because the body remembers what the mind has long since rationalized, and it has been waiting for you to finally ask what it has been holding. In Chapter 5, we sit with the beginning of the turn, the slow, imperfect, deeply personal process of learning to extend toward yourself the same tenderness you have always given so freely to others. And in Chapter 6, we touch the edges of what becomes possible when a woman finally stops standing at the back of her own life. Before we begin, if these words are already reaching something in you, if this audiobook is finding you at a moment when you most need it, I want to gently invite you to follow the Unchained Heart channel. Every week, we return to this same healing territory, with new audiobooks exploring the many landscapes of emotional recovery, self-understanding, and the quiet work of coming home to yourself. Following the channel means you will never miss a conversation that might matter. And right now, this conversation is just beginning. Let us begin gently at the root of this. Chapter 1. The first place you learn to disappear there is a particular kind of learning that happens before we have words for it. It happens in the body first, in the way we read the room before we enter it, in the way we adjust our volume, our mood, our needs, to match what seems safe. It happens in childhood, in the ordinary geography of home, in the texture of how love was given and what conditions, spoken or silent, seem to surround it. For many women who find themselves, decades later, struggling to love themselves, the learning began there. Not necessarily in obvious or dramatic ways. Not always in households where love was withheld or harm was done openly. Sometimes it happened in homes that were, by most outward measures, perfectly fine. Homes where a mother worked herself to the edge of exhaustion and never once asked for help. Homes where a father's approval was the emotional weather system that everyone learned to read. Homes where the unspoken rule was that keeping the peace mattered more than telling the truth. Homes where being good meant being quiet, where being loved meant being useful. In those environments, children learn a specific grammar of worth. They learn that love is not simply given, it is responded to. It flows towards certain behaviors and away from others. It arrives when you are cheerful, when you are helpful, when you do not take up too much space or ask for too much or feel things too loudly. It retreats, sometimes in ways so subtle you can barely name them, when you are needy or difficult or inconveniently sad. And children are extraordinarily adaptive. They learn this grammar quickly, and they apply it with the kind of wholehearted commitment that only a child can bring to the project of being loved. They begin to edit themselves, not because they are weak, not because they are broken, but because connection is the deepest biological need a human child has, and they will do whatever they must to preserve it. This is where so many of us first learned to disappear. Not all at once, not in any single dramatic moment, but gradually, in small daily decisions to swallow a feeling rather than express it, to agree rather than push back, to make ourselves smaller so that someone else could feel larger, to meet the need in the room even when the need in our own chest was louder and more urgent. By the time we reach adulthood, this editing has become so automatic, so seamless, that we do not even experience it as editing. It simply feels like who we are. A woman who naturally puts others first. A woman who does not need much. A woman who is, everyone agrees, so easy to be around, so understanding, so giving. What no one sees, what she herself may barely see, is the accumulating cost. The long, quiet hunger. The sense surfacing sometimes only in the smallest of moments, a birthday that passed without acknowledgement, a conversation in which she was never asked how she was doing, a decision made for the household that did not include her, that something is being slowly and steadily extracted from her, and she does not know how to ask for it back. The first step toward loving yourself is not, as it is sometimes described, an act of assertion. It is an act of recognition. It is the moment you allow yourself to trace the thread back, to see, without judgment, that the woman who struggles to prioritize herself today learned not to. In a room she no longer lives in, from people who were themselves only doing what they had been taught. There is no blame in this tracing. There is only illumination. An illumination, even when what it reveals is painful, is always the beginning of freedom. This brings us gently to something that grows directly from this root. Chapter 2. The woman you became in the trying, when a child learns that her worth is contingent, that love flows toward certain versions of herself and not others. She does not simply absorb this lesson and move on. She builds her identity around it. She becomes, over years and with extraordinary unconscious precision, the version of herself that she has learned is most lovable, most acceptable, most safe. This is not a failure of character. It is a feat of adaptation. But adaptation that serves survival in childhood can quietly become a prison in adulthood. Because the woman who emerged from that adaptation, the woman who is endlessly capable, endlessly giving, endlessly attuned to the needs of others, has often built herself on a foundation that was never truly hers. She is the woman who knows, with almost eerie accuracy, what everyone in the room is feeling. She reads emotional weather like a navigator reads the sky, not because she was born with some extraordinary gift, but because she trained herself to do it from a very young age, because knowing how others felt was how she kept herself safe. She is the woman who apologizes reflexively, who softens her opinions before she even speaks them, who feels a flash of anxiety when someone seems displeased with her, even someone she does not particularly care about. She is the woman who finds it genuinely easier to identify what others need than to name what she herself is hungry for. And she is often, on the surface, deeply admired. She is called warm, generous, selfless, the person everyone comes to, the one who holds the group together, the one who always knows what to say. What is rarely spoken, what she herself may have never allowed herself to say, is that she is also exhausted. That the constant attunement to others has left her strangely numb to herself. That she can spend an entire day meeting need after need, at work, at home, in friendship, in love, and arrive at the end of it with no clear sense of what she herself actually needed or felt or wanted. That the self she presents to the world, however genuinely kind and capable, is a self that has been so thoroughly shaped by others' expectations that she is no longer sure where their imprint ends and she begins. This is one of the quieter griefs that many women carry without quite naming it. Not the grief of obvious loss, but the grief of a self that was slowly hollowed out in the very act of trying to be loved. A self that learned to be so many things for so many people that she forgot, or perhaps never had the chance to discover, what she simply was. The woman who is learning to love herself first is not undoing her capacity for care. That capacity is real, and it is beautiful, and it belongs to her. What she is undoing is the belief that her worth depends on it, that she must earn her place in her own life through her usefulness to others, that who she is, when she is not performing or giving or adapting, is somehow less deserving of love. She is learning, slowly, and sometimes painfully, that there is a self beneath the adaptation. Quieter, perhaps, than the one everyone sees, less polished, less immediately comfortable, but more honest, more alive, more entirely her own. Let us now sit with where this woman tends to find herself in love. Chapter 3. The pattern that keeps finding you there is something that many women notice, usually after the second or third time it has happened, that stops them cold. They have made such different choices. They have chosen someone who seemed nothing like the last one. The circumstances are different. The relationship looks different from the outside. The early feeling is entirely different. And yet somehow, quietly, over months or years, they find themselves in the same emotional geography, the same dynamic, the same particular ache. This is not a sign of stupidity. It is not evidence of bad luck or poor judgment. It is the almost inevitable consequence of an unexamined pattern, because we do not choose our relationships from our conscious mind alone. We choose them from our nervous system, from the emotional blueprint formed in us long before we were old enough to evaluate it, from the part of us that recognizes, in a feeling of comfort or attraction or rightness, something familiar, something that feels like home, even if home was a place that hurt. For women who learned early that love required their self-erasure, the familiar often lives in relationships where that erasure is, in some form, invited. Not always by cruel people. Not always by people who are consciously taking, but by dynamics, often mutual and complex, in which one person's needs consistently center the space, and the other person's gift for attunement and accommodation is so available, so automatic, so deeply trained, that it fills every gap without anyone even acknowledging it is happening. She is the one who adjusts, who waits, who manages her own disappointment so quietly that her partner never even knows she was disappointed. Who finds a way to need less when needing more seems like it might create conflict or distance. Who tells herself she is being understanding when sometimes she is simply being afraid. Afraid of the withdrawal that might come if she asked for more. Afraid that her needs are too much. Afraid that love, once again, will flow away from her if she stops earning it. And in these relationships she can be genuinely happy much of the time. She can feel real love. But there is something underneath the happiness. A low, continuous note of longing, a sense that she is always slightly behind the glass, giving everything and somehow not quite receiving in equal measure, loved for what she does far more than simply for who she is. The pattern does not break because she finds the right person. The pattern breaks because she becomes a different person, or more precisely because she comes back to herself. Because she becomes someone who knows what she needs and is willing to name it. Someone whose sense of worth is no longer contingent on managing another person's emotional experience. Someone who can tolerate, without panic, the discomfort of being less easy, less accommodating, less immediately pleasant, because she has finally decided that her own inner life deserves space in the room. This shift does not happen all at once. It does not arrive in a single moment of clarity. It begins as a quiet decision, made and remade across ordinary days, to stop abandoning herself every time it might be convenient for someone else, to stay a little longer in her own corner, to ask herself, before she asks what everyone else needs, what she herself is carrying and what she herself is hungry for. This brings us to the place that holds all of it, and that has been waiting patiently for this conversation. Chapter 4. What the body has been keeping the mind is a remarkably skilled negotiator. It can construct the most persuasive arguments for why we are fine. It can reframe and contextualize and find the silver lining and decide that what happened was not that bad, or was understandable, or is over now, or is simply something we have to accept. The mind is articulate and adaptive, and it will do a tremendous amount of work to maintain the story that we are coping. The body keeps a different kind of record. The body does not negotiate, it does not reframe, it does not decide that something is in the past and therefore no longer relevant. It holds its history in its tissues, in the tightness that lives just below the sternum, in the shoulders that never quite come down from their position near the ears, in the way the jaw clenches at a certain tone of voice, in the stomach that contracts before a difficult conversation even begins. The body has been present for everything. Every accommodation, every swallowed feeling, every moment of waiting to see how another person's mood would determine the quality of the day. It has been absorbing what the mind was busy processing, and it has been waiting with extraordinary patience for permission to speak. Many women who are in the early stages of learning to love themselves find that they are also in the early stages of learning to listen to their bodies for the first time. Not because they have been ignoring the body willfully, but because the habit of attending to others has extended all the way into the physical. They notice their partner's fatigue before they notice their own. They meet the appetite in the room before they check whether they are hungry. They push through their own exhaustion because there is always something else that needs doing, someone else who needs tending. And the body, for a long time, accommodates this. But it also accumulates. There is a particular kind of tiredness that sleep does not fix. A bone-level exhaustion that is not about the hours kept, but about the constant expenditure of self-regulation, of emotional management, of keeping the internal weather calm so that the external weather stays manageable. There is a particular kind of anxiety that does not have a specific object, a background hum of vigilance that was once adaptive and necessary and has long since become the body's default frequency. There are the inexplicable, tearful moments in the car, in the shower, in the quiet after everyone else is asleep, that feel like they come from nowhere, but are in fact coming from somewhere very deep, from a self that has been waiting for a quiet enough moment to finally be heard. Learning to love yourself is also, profoundly, a practice of re-inhabiting yourself, of returning to the body not as something to be managed or improved or pushed past its limits, but as the primary site of your own inner experience, of beginning to ask it, in the way you might ask a person who has been waiting a long time to speak, what it has been holding, what it is carrying right now in this moment, where the tension is, what the tiredness is about, whether the comfort you have been offering to others has ever, in sufficient measure, been offered to yourself. This is not a dramatic or complicated practice. It is simply the act of pausing in the midst of everything and asking, sincerely, without rushing on to the next thing, how you are. Not how you are managing, not how you are functioning, but how you truly are in the body right now, in this particular life you are living. This pause is one of the first acts of self-love, and from it, something begins to grow. Chapter 5. The slow turn toward yourself. No one arrives at self-love in a single afternoon. That is worth saying plainly, because so much of what surrounds the concept suggests that it is a decision, a commitment you make one morning, perhaps after reading something that moves you, and then maintain from that point forward through daily practice and positive thinking. The reality is quieter and more irregular and infinitely more honest than that. The turn toward yourself is not a single movement. It is 1,000 small movements, many of them barely perceptible, some of them immediately reversed. It is the moment you speak your preference in a restaurant instead of saying whatever is fine with me. It is the moment you allow yourself to be disappointed, really, honestly disappointed, without immediately moving to manage the disappointment or talk yourself out of it. It is the moment you notice that you are about to apologize for something that is not your fault, and you pause, just for a second, before you do. It is the moment you stay in bed for one more hour, not because you have earned it, but simply because your body is asking for it. And you decide, quietly, that this is reason enough. None of these moments are triumphant. They do not feel like liberation. They often feel awkward and slightly wrong, the way anything feels when you are reversing a long-established habit. Because that is exactly what they are. the reversal of a long-established habit of placing yourself last. And habits do not reverse without friction, without the sensation that you are doing something somehow improper, without the inner voice that sounds remarkably like the earliest voices you can remember, asking what you think you are doing, who you think you are, why your needs should suddenly matter so much. That voice is worth sitting with for a moment, because it is one of the most important things to understand about the process of learning to love yourself. The resistance is not random. It is not irrational. It is the voice of the original adaptation, the part of you that learned very early and very thoroughly that your belonging was contingent on your self-sacrifice. It is trying, in its way, to protect you, to keep you in the position that once felt safe. It does not yet know that safety no longer requires that particular price. Learning to love yourself means, in part, learning to respond to that voice with compassion rather than either compliance or combat. Not silencing it, not arguing it down, but recognizing what it is. The voice of an earlier self who did what she had to do to survive, and gently, with the kind of tenderness you might offer a frightened child, telling her that things are different now, that she does not have to earn her place anymore, that there is room here for her needs, that she is allowed to rest. This is where genuine self-love differs most profoundly from its popular depictions. It is not primarily a practice of adding things, rituals, routines, rewards, to a life that continues otherwise unchanged. It is a practice of shifting the fundamental relationship you have with yourself, of becoming someone who is, finally, on her own side, who meets her own hunger with the same generosity and warmth she has always brought to the hunger of others, who does not require a justification for her own needs, who is allowed, simply allowed, to be. And from this shift, quietly and without announcement, something begins to change in every relationship, every room, every ordinary day. Before we arrive at our final chapter, I want to pause for just a moment. If this audiobook is speaking to something real in your experience, if you are finding yourself in these words in a way that matters, I want you to know that Unchained Heart has an entire library of audiobooks exploring this same healing territory. Emotional recovery, patterns formed in childhood, the long work of reclaiming yourself after relationships that slowly made you smaller. Each audiobook is a full companion for the journey you are on. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so that nothing in this library finds you too late. You deserve every conversation that was made with you in mind. Let us now sit with what waits on the other side of this turn. Chapter 6. What it feels like when you finally come home to yourself. There is no single arrival. There is no morning you wake up and discover, cleanly and permanently, that you now love yourself. What there is, and what many women who have done this slow, private, imperfect work begin to notice, is a gradual shift in the texture of ordinary life. A quieting of certain anxieties that once ran constantly in the background. A growing capacity to be in a room without reading the room before you enter it. A growing ease with the question of what you want, what you feel, what you need. Questions that once felt either impossible to answer or somehow inappropriate to ask. What changes is not that life becomes easier in the conventional sense. The challenges remain. The people who require your energy remain. The world's demands do not diminish because you have decided to value yourself. What changes is the internal climate in which you meet all of those things. What changes is the presence of yourself as a constant, no longer a woman who disappears when things get hard. No longer a woman who offers herself up as a solution to every problem in the room, but a woman who is, finally, here, in her own life, on her own side. Women who have traveled this path often describe it in quiet terms. Not the triumphant language of transformation, but the softer language of return. They say things like, "I feel like I can breathe again." They say, "I did not realize how much energy I was spending trying to manage everyone else's experience of me." They say, "I set a boundary last week that I would never have been able to set a year ago. And I felt guilty and afraid, and I held it anyway, and nothing fell apart, and I realized that maybe I had been afraid of a collapse that was never actually going to come." They say, "I am not perfect at this. I still catch myself shrinking. But now I notice it, and that noticing is everything." This is what it means to love yourself first, more than anyone else, not to love others less, not to withdraw the extraordinary warmth and care that is genuinely yours, but to recognize that at the center of every relationship, every act of care, every choice about how to spend the hours of your one life, there is a self, a woman, with her own hungers, her own depths, her own right to take up space in the world. And to decide, not once, but continuously, in the small dailiness of ordinary living, that she matters, that her needs are real, that her joy is not a luxury to be earned but a legitimate destination, that she is allowed to receive and rest and be known and be imperfect and still be entirely deserving of love. This is the most quietly radical thing a woman who has spent her life loving others before herself can do, not for the world, not to prove a point, but for herself. For the version of herself that is still, beneath everything, waiting to be met with the same open-hearted generosity she has always offered to everyone else. She has been waiting a long time, and she will know when it finally arrives what it was she was always hungry for. Throughout these chapters, we have sat together in some of the most private territories of a woman's inner life. The early places where she first learned to make herself small. The identity she built in the effort to be loved. The patterns that followed her into relationships without her knowledge. The body that held what the mind could not. The first tentative movements toward her own center. And the quiet wholeness that begins to emerge when she finally decides to make herself a priority, not as a reward for good behavior, but as a simple and inarguable fact of her own worth. What does this mean for where you are right now? Perhaps you are at the very beginning of this, just beginning to name something that has been unnamed for years. Perhaps you are somewhere in the middle, in the difficult and necessary friction of changing old patterns. Perhaps you are simply here, in the car, or in the dark, and something in this conversation has found you at exactly the moment it needed to. Wherever you are, this is true. The fact that you are asking the question, the fact that some part of you reached for this audiobook today, means that the turn has already begun. You do not have to have it all figured out. You do not have to have already arrived. You simply have to be willing to keep moving in the direction of yourself, to keep choosing, in the small and ordinary moments, the woman who is finally allowed to come first. You have been giving your love away for a very long time. You have been generous and patient and extraordinarily capable of holding others. And now it is time, gently, without guilt, without any need to justify it to anyone, to turn that same love toward yourself. Not instead of others, but before, and always. You have carried this long enough, and you are not carrying it alone anymore. If these words have stayed with you, if this journey feels like one you want to continue, please follow the Unchained Heart channel. Every week, a new audiobook returns to this same sacred territory, because the work of coming home to yourself is never finished in a single listening, and you deserve a companion for every mile of it. Follow the channel, and let us keep walking this together. End of the audiobook.